The truth doesn't always belong to the people who can see it. I had spent 27 years learning that lesson one sound at a time. People often assumed blindness made the world smaller, quieter, somehow incomplete. They were always wrong. My world was overflowing with details they never noticed. The soft scrape of leather shoes across polished marble. The nervous catch in someone's breathing before they spoke a lie. The difference between expensive perfume and confidence that couldn't be bought. That Thursday evening, every sound inside the Blackwood Grand Hotel felt carefully arranged, like an orchestra tuning before a performance no one realized they were about to witness. My fingers rested lightly against the smooth handle of my white cane as I stepped away from the grand piano. The applause still echoed through the ballroom, warm and generous, bouncing from the high ceilings decorated with crystal chandeliers I had only imagined through other people's descriptions. Music had always been my way of seeing. Every note painted a shape in my mind. Every audience revealed itself through silence just as much as applause. "Wonderful performance, Miss Carter," the event coordinator whispered as she guided me toward the backstage hallway. Her voice sounded relieved, the way people always did after expensive charity galas survived another flawless evening. "Thank you," I replied with a smile. "You have beautiful guests." She laughed softly. "How could you possibly know that? Beautiful people carry themselves differently." She didn't answer. She simply squeezed my elbow for a second before letting go. I continued alone, tapping my cane lightly across the marble floor. Left, right, smooth hallway, thick carpet, brass trim along the walls. Every surface spoke if someone listened carefully enough. Somewhere nearby, a string quartet began another piece. Champagne glasses touched together with delicate chimes. Conversations drifted through the air like overlapping waves. Wealth had its own soundtrack. It wasn't loud. It whispered. As I reached the main corridor, something interrupted the rhythm I had mapped in my head. Tick, tick, tick. A mechanical sound. Slow, precise, old-fashioned, not electronic, not decorative. It reminded me of the pocket watches my grandfather used to repair in his tiny workshop outside Boston before arthritis stole the steadiness from his hands. The sound appeared for only 3 seconds before disappearing into the crowd. Strange. Nobody wore watches like that anymore. I stopped walking. My ears searched instinctively, but all I found was the distant murmur of elegant conversations and the low hum of the hotel's ventilation. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe not. My grandmother used to tell me that unusual sounds deserved respect because they often arrived before unusual people. I smiled at the memory and continued toward the exit. Then everything changed. Someone stepped into my path just as I turned the corner. My shoulder brushed against a firm chest. My cane slipped slightly across the marble. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately, instinctively reaching forward before stopping myself. The hallway became impossibly still. Conversations died one after another until the silence spread across the ballroom like a slow-moving wave. Even the quartet stopped playing. I could hear someone's glass being set carefully onto a table. Another person inhaled sharply. Leather shifted. Shoes stopped moving. No one spoke. It felt as though hundreds of strangers had forgotten how to breathe. My pulse quickened. What had just happened? I didn't see. I stopped myself with an awkward smile. I suppose that's obvious. Nobody laughed. Instead, I heard measured footsteps approaching from somewhere behind the man I'd bumped into. More than one person. Calm. Disciplined. Professional. Then another sound reached me. Not footsteps. Not voices. Fabric moving against skin. Barely audible. My ears caught the faint whisper of tattooed skin stretching beneath tailored clothing as the man slowly folded his arms. He hadn't said a single word. Yet every person around us seemed frozen by his silence alone. The air itself felt heavier. I noticed the scent before anything else. Cedar. Italian leather. A trace of black coffee. Clean, understated, expensive. Then came his voice. Low. Calm. Controlled. The kind of voice that never needed to be loud because everyone already listened. Stay. Just one word. Nothing more. Yet something inside the room shifted. I couldn't explain why, but I suddenly knew that whoever stood in front of me wasn't simply important. He was the reason everyone else had stopped breathing. And somewhere beneath the silence, almost hidden beneath my own racing heartbeat, I heard it again. Tick, tick, tick. The same mechanical sound. Closer this time. Much closer. The silence stretched so long that I began wondering whether I had accidentally walked into the wrong room instead of the wrong person. Then the man spoke again, his voice steady enough to calm a storm. "Are you hurt?" It was such an ordinary question that it almost made me laugh. Around us, however, nobody seemed willing to breathe until he finished speaking. I shook my head gently. "No, I simply misjudged the turn. I apologize." For a moment, neither of us moved. My ears searched the stillness automatically. Somewhere to my left, a waiter quietly lifted a serving tray before it could rattle. Someone several feet behind me shifted their weight, but immediately became motionless again. Even the air conditioning seemed louder than the crowd. The strange ticking returned. Tick, tick, tick. Slow, precise, old-fashioned. It came from somewhere behind the man standing in front of me, not from him. I tilted my head without thinking. "That sound again," I whispered to myself. "What sound?" he asked. His question came immediately, almost too quickly, as though he had been studying every change in my breathing. "A mechanical watch. Maybe a pocket watch. It is old. The spring is slightly uneven." Another silence followed. This one felt different. Heavier. Curious. Then I heard someone behind him inhale sharply before catching themselves. "There are no watches here," another male voice said carefully. "Everyone uses phones now." I smiled politely. Someone still carries one. My grandmother always said old objects remember old promises. This one has not been serviced in years. I realized how strange I probably sounded and laughed softly. "I am sorry. Occupational habit. My ears notice things before my brain remembers to stay quiet." The man standing in front of me did not laugh. Instead, he stepped one pace closer. I could hear the faint movement of expensive fabric and smell cedar mixed with fresh coffee. There was something controlled about him. Nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. "What is your name?" he asked. "Evelyn Carter. You played the piano tonight." It was not a question. "Yes." Beautifully. The compliment sounded genuine, almost reluctant, as though praise was not something he handed out often. "Thank you." Another pause settled between us. This time it felt less intimidating and more thoughtful. "Damien," he finally said. Only his first name. Yet the reaction around us told me it was enough. Several footsteps shifted farther away. Someone quietly opened a door and closed it again. The room continued orbiting around the gravity of a man I still could not see. "It is nice to meet you, Damien," I replied, although I wish it had been under less embarrassing circumstances. To my surprise, I heard the smallest hint of amusement in his breathing. Not laughter, just the beginning of it. "Most people spend months trying to get my attention," he said. "You managed it in 2 seconds. Pure accident." Perhaps. The word lingered between us. Then the ticking returned once more. Tick, tick, tick. My smile faded. There it is again. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard another set of measured footsteps approaching from somewhere behind him. Whoever it was stopped several feet away. "Sir," the newcomer said quietly, "the guests are waiting." Damien ignored the comment. "Which direction?" he asked me instead. "The sound." "Yes." I slowly turned my head. Listening had always been like following sunlight across closed eyelids. Tiny differences guided everything. I focused on the echoes bouncing off marble columns, crystal glasses, polished walls. Then I lifted my hand and pointed toward the far side of the ballroom. About 40 feet away, near a doorway. "The person is standing still now." Absolute silence answered me. Then, almost imperceptibly, the ticking stopped. Whoever carried it had either covered it or walked away. I lowered my hand. "It is gone." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Damien exhaled, slow and thoughtful. "Interesting." The single word carried far more weight than it should have. I did not understand why, but I could feel dozens of invisible questions suddenly filling the room. Before I could ask what was happening, Damien offered his arm with quiet confidence. "Walk with me, Evelyn." I hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere quieter." Normally, I would have refused. My parents had taught me never to follow strangers, no matter how polite they sounded. Yet something inside his voice felt unexpectedly steady. Not harmless, never harmless, but strangely dependable. And somewhere deep inside my instincts, louder than caution itself, another thought quietly appeared. Whatever mystery had just found me had already begun, whether I walked away or not. Damien guided me through the ballroom without hurrying, his footsteps measured enough for me to match them naturally. Nobody spoke as we passed. I could feel the silence surrounding us more clearly than any stare. The polished marble beneath my shoes gradually softened into thick carpet, muting every step until the sounds of the gala faded behind a pair of heavy doors. The air changed first. It carried the scent of cedar shelves, fresh coffee, and old books instead of perfume and champagne. Damien stopped beside me before gently pulling out a chair. "Please," he said. I smiled politely before sitting down, placing my cane carefully against the table. "Thank you." A porcelain cup was placed nearby with remarkable precision. "Chamomile tea," he said. "I was told you prefer it after performances." I turned toward his voice. "Someone has done their homework. I believe preparation saves misunderstandings." There was no arrogance in the statement, only certainty. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup, letting the heat settle my thoughts. "You still have not told me why everyone became so quiet." Damien remained silent for a few moments. I heard him sit across from me. The leather chair released a quiet sigh beneath his weight. "People often become cautious around influence," he answered. "That sounds like a careful way of avoiding the real answer." To my surprise, he laughed softly. It was brief, almost unfamiliar to him. "Perhaps it is." The room fell quiet again. Somewhere outside, an elevator chimed. A distant conversation drifted through the hallway before disappearing. Then my attention caught something familiar. Tick, tick, tick. My fingers tightened around the cup. "It is back." Damien did not ask what I meant this time. "Where?" he asked immediately. I listened carefully. The sound echoed faintly through the walls, almost hidden beneath the building's ventilation. "Higher than before," I whispered. "Not this floor. Maybe above us. Whoever carries it is walking slowly." Damien stood. I recognized the subtle movement of his jacket. Another door opened behind him. Someone entered but stopped before speaking. "Everything is ready, sir," the newcomer said quietly. Damien answered without taking his attention away from me. "Delay the meeting by 15 minutes. "Yes, sir." The door closed again. I frowned. Was I interrupting something important? "Perhaps you are the important thing tonight." I almost laughed, assuming he was joking, but his voice remained completely serious. "I only heard a watch." "No," he replied calmly. "You heard something that none of my people noticed." The words settled heavily between us. My grandmother had once told me that extraordinary moments rarely announce themselves. They arrived disguised as ordinary conversations. I slowly placed the cup back onto its saucer. Then maybe someone wanted that sound to be ignored. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard him begin walking toward the large window overlooking the city. Traffic hummed far below, blending with the distant horns and steady rhythm of Manhattan at night. "Evelyn," he finally said, "if I asked you to help me identify that sound again, would you?" I considered the question carefully. Every instinct told me that saying yes would pull me into a world far beyond concert halls and charity events. Yet another instinct, quieter but stronger, reminded me that truth sometimes arrives through unexpected doors. I nodded once. "I will help you listen." Across the room, Damien released a slow breath that sounded less like relief and more like the beginning of a decision neither of us could take back. Damien opened the office door without a sound, and the quiet hallway greeted us like a world that had been holding its breath. I rose carefully, folding my cane before extending it again. "Do not tell me where we are going," I said. "I want to hear it." He sounded curious. "Why?" "Because every building has a voice. If I listen first, I remember it better." He did not argue. We walked side by side, our footsteps echoing softly against polished stone before changing to the muted rhythm of a thick runner stretching through another corridor. Somewhere nearby, an elevator opened with a gentle chime. Farther away, silverware clinked against porcelain as the gala continued without us. It amazed me how quickly life returned to normal for everyone else while mine had quietly stepped onto an entirely different path. The familiar ticking returned before either of us spoke again. Tick, tick, tick. I stopped immediately. "It moved," I whispered. Damien stopped beside me. "Which direction?" I listened carefully, allowing every background sound to settle until only the tiny mechanical rhythm remained. "Straight ahead. About 30 feet. The person is walking slowly now." My heartbeat became the loudest sound inside my chest. Whoever carried that watch had no idea another stranger was following the sound instead of the person. Damien remained perfectly still. Even his breathing became quieter, almost disappearing. Then another pair of footsteps approached from the opposite direction. Smooth, confident, expensive shoes. A pleasant voice greeted us. "Mr. Blackwood, I have been looking for you." Damien answered politely. "Good evening, Mr. Sullivan." The man laughed warmly. "Your charity events always become the talk of the city." They exchanged a few courteous remarks while I continued listening. The ticking grew louder for 2 seconds, then drifted behind the newcomer before fading once more. My eyebrows lifted. Something did not fit. I waited until the conversation ended and the footsteps disappeared before speaking. It was not him. Damien turned toward me. "You are certain?" "Yes." His footsteps and the watch separated halfway through the conversation. The sound continued after he stopped moving. Someone else passed behind him. Silence answered me again, but this silence felt different. It carried surprise instead of caution. "Most people would never notice that," Damien said quietly. I smiled. "Most people are watching. I am listening." We continued walking until we reached a quiet lounge overlooking the city. I could not see the skyline, but I felt the warmth of moonlight against the windows and heard distant traffic flowing like an endless river below. Damien poured another cup of tea before sitting across from me once again. "Tell me something," he said. "When did you first realize your hearing was different?" I rested my hands around the warm cup. "After I lost my sight, everyone kept apologizing for what I could no longer do. My grandmother refused to apologize. She handed me an old music box instead and told me to describe it without touching it. I listened for nearly an hour before I noticed one tiny gear slipping every fourth turn. She smiled and said, "You are not losing a world, Evelyn. You are learning another one." Damien remained quiet long enough that I wondered whether my story had surprised him. Finally he spoke. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman." She was. I lowered my eyes toward the cup, remembering the gentle certainty in my grandmother's voice. "She also taught me something else." "What was that?" I smiled faintly. "When one strange detail refuses to disappear, it usually means someone has been hoping nobody would notice it." The room became perfectly still again. Then Damien released a slow breath. "If you are right," he said, "tonight may become much more important than either of us expected." The city sounded different after 10 o'clock. The traffic outside softened into a steady current instead of scattered bursts. Inside the hotel, conversations grew smaller, more private, as guests settled into comfortable circles and forgot about the performance that had brought them together. Damien and I remained in the lounge, overlooking the skyline. I finished the last sip of chamomile tea before setting the cup carefully onto its saucer. The porcelain clicked once against the table. "You are thinking," I said. He did not deny it. "I am deciding how much I should tell you." I smiled faintly. "That usually means the answer is more than people expect." He let out a quiet breath that almost sounded amused. "You have an unusual way of understanding people." I listened longer than most. Another silence settled between us, but it no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. Damien finally spoke. "Several months ago, someone very close to my organization disappeared without leaving an explanation. Nothing was stolen. Nothing obvious was damaged. Yet since then, information has reached people before it should. Meetings have been anticipated. Decisions have somehow become predictable." I rested both hands around the warm cup, although the tea had already cooled. "And you believe tonight is connected?" "I believe coincidence deserves to be questioned." The sentence lingered in my thoughts. My grandmother would have approved. She never trusted coincidences either. Before I could respond, the faint ticking returned. Tick, tick, tick. I lifted one finger immediately. Damien became silent. The sound drifted through the hallway outside the lounge. Slow, patient, measured. Whoever carried it was walking with confidence rather than urgency. I closed my eyes out of habit, allowing every echo to build a map inside my mind. Carpet, then polished stone. A pause near the doorway. The ticking stopped for 2 seconds before continuing again. The person hesitated outside. I whispered, "How can you tell?" Damien asked quietly. The echo changed. They turned toward this room before walking away. Neither of us moved. Damien pressed a button on the desk beside him. A calm voice answered almost immediately through the speaker. "Yes, sir." "Did anyone pass the East Lounge during the last minute?" A short pause followed. "One guest crossed the hallway, sir." Nobody entered. Damien thanked the man and released the button. He turned back toward me. "You were right again. I laughed softly, not from pride but from relief that my instincts still made sense outside the world I understood. My hearing is only useful if someone believes it. Damien answered without hesitation. I do. The certainty in those two words surprised me more than I expected. Trust was usually built over years, not conversations. Yet something about this evening had compressed time itself. It felt as though we had known each other much longer than a few hours. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Come in, Damien said. The door opened quietly. I recognized the careful footsteps of the man who had delayed the earlier meeting. Sir, the guests are beginning to leave. Security reports everything is calm. Thank you, Lucas. The door closed once more. Damien stood and walked toward the window. You should probably go home, he said after a long pause. You have already done far more than anyone could have expected tonight. I nodded slowly. He was right. My apartment, my piano, and the familiar rhythm of ordinary life suddenly sounded comforting. Yet as I reached for my folded cane, one question refused to leave my mind. Damien, yes. If the watch belongs to someone hiding in plain sight, why would they bring it to such an important event? He answered so quietly that I almost missed it. Perhaps because they believe nobody is paying attention. I stood, unfolding my cane with a gentle click that echoed through the room. At that exact moment, somewhere far beyond the lounge, the ticking returned once more. This time it was joined by something new. A delicate melody. For piano notes played so softly that most people would have dismissed them as background music. I did not. I recognized the sequence immediately. It was the opening phrase of a lullaby my grandmother used to play every Sunday afternoon. I slowly turned toward the sound, my heartbeat quickening for an entirely different reason. Damien, I whispered, that melody is not an accident. The melody lingered in the hallway for only a few seconds before dissolving into the ordinary sounds of the hotel, but it was enough to stop me where I stood. My grandmother had never played that lullaby in public. She used to say it belonged to quiet afternoons, old family memories, and people who understood that music could carry stories words never could. I slowly lowered my cane until its tip rested against the carpet. I have not heard that melody since I was 12, I said. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard him move closer until he stood beside me. Could someone here know your family? He asked. I shook my head. Not unless life has become much stranger than I believed. The hallway remained still. Somewhere farther away, an elevator door opened with its familiar chime. Guests laughed politely as they prepared to leave the charity gala. Glasses clinked. Coats rustled. Everything sounded wonderfully ordinary except for the questions now circling inside my mind. Then the ticking returned. Tick, tick, tick. This time it blended with slow footsteps moving away from us. The watch, I whispered, and the melody came from the same direction. Damien spoke quietly. Can you follow it? I smiled faintly. Not by running, by listening. We stepped into the corridor together. I counted every sound as we walked. Marble beneath our feet reflected tiny echoes toward the ceiling. A housekeeping cart stood against one wall, its loose wool squeaking every few seconds. Someone pressed the elevator button twice in quick succession. None of those details mattered. The ticking did. It drifted through the corridor before disappearing around a corner. We followed at an unhurried pace. Damien never reached for my arm unless I needed guidance, and I appreciated that more than he probably realized. He trusted me to move through the world my own way. Left hallway, I said quietly. The sound echoed longer there. We turned together. The hotel grew quieter as we moved farther from the ballroom. Decorative fountains replaced conversation. Soft instrumental music floated through hidden speakers in the ceiling. Then everything stopped. The ticking vanished. I remained perfectly still, allowing my breathing to slow until even the smallest sounds became clear again. After several long seconds, I heard the faint creak of an old wooden door opening somewhere nearby. Not wide, just enough for someone to enter before closing it carefully. I pointed toward the opposite wall. There. Damien walked a few steps before stopping. This is the hotel's private music library, he said with quiet surprise. It is rarely used during events. My heart skipped. May we go inside? A key turned gently in the lock. The door opened with a whisper instead of a click. The scent greeted me before anything else. Old paper, polished wood, piano varnish, sheet music that had rested on shelves for decades. It smelled like memories. I smiled without realizing it. This room has been loved. Damien sounded almost amused. You can hear that too? No, I answered softly. I can smell it. We stepped inside. My shoes touched hardwood instead of carpet. Somewhere near the center of the room stood a grand piano. I knew because even silence echoed differently around its curved body. Then I heard something else. Fingertips brushing lightly across a stack of sheet music. Someone had been here recently. There is another person, I whispered. Damien became alert, but kept his voice calm. Hello. No answer came. Instead, a single piano key was pressed very gently. Middle C, clear, pure, familiar. I slowly walked toward the instrument until my fingertips rested against its polished edge. Folded neatly on the music stand was a single sheet of paper. Damien picked it up. I heard the soft rustle as he unfolded it. What does it say? I asked. He remained silent long enough that I turned toward him. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It carried genuine astonishment. It only has one sentence. My heartbeat quickened. Read it. Damien drew a slow breath before speaking the words aloud. The one who hears the truth will find the next note before midnight. The sentence echoed in my mind long after Damien folded the note. Before midnight. I turned those 3 words over like pieces of a melody, searching for the next chord. Someone wanted us to find this, I said quietly. Damien slid the paper back onto the music stand with unusual care. That seems obvious. I smiled faintly. No, someone wanted you to find it. I simply happened to be the one who could hear the path that led here. He did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard him slowly walk around the grand piano. His footsteps stopped near a bookshelf lined with old music scores. The room settled into another thoughtful silence. I let my fingertips rest lightly against the polished piano lid. The wood still carried a trace of warmth. Someone had touched it not long ago. Damien, I whispered. This instrument has been played tonight. He paused. How can you tell? The finish is still warm where the hands rested. The strings are gently settling. There is also the faint scent of fresh resin from a violin case. Someone was making music here very recently. A quiet breath escaped him. You continue to notice what everyone else overlooks. I laughed softly. That is becoming a dangerous compliment. He surprised me by laughing as well. It was fuller this time, natural enough that the room suddenly felt less guarded. Perhaps, he admitted, but it is also true. A soft vibration interrupted the moment. Damien's phone. He answered with his usual calm voice. Yes. I listened without intending to. His side of the conversation was brief. Understood. Do not stop anyone. Simply observe. He ended the call. Another guest? I asked. One of my staff noticed someone leaving this wing a few minutes before we arrived. They believed the person was carrying an antique leather portfolio. My heartbeat quickened. Paper. Sheet music. Exactly. I stepped away from the piano and slowly turned toward the room. Every space tells a story through its silence. Libraries are especially honest. They remember who rushes and who lingers. I listened carefully. Air drifted through a slightly open window. Shelves absorbed echoes differently depending on how full they were. Then something unusual caught my attention. One shelf reflected sound unevenly. I walked toward it, counting each step until my fingertips reached polished wood. This shelf is different, I murmured. Damien joined me. Different how? There is empty space behind part of it. He rested his hand against the same surface. A gentle push produced the faintest movement. Wood brushed against wood before stopping. A hidden panel, he said quietly. Not hidden very well from echoes. He eased it open. Cool air drifted through the narrow opening. I heard paper shifting. A small wooden box was resting inside. Damien lifted it carefully and placed it on a nearby table. The lid opened with a delicate click. What is inside? I asked. An old metronome, he replied. And another folded note. The word metronome immediately explained the familiar rhythm that had drawn us through the hotel. Read it, I said. He unfolded the paper slowly. The message says, do not chase the sound. Follow the memory. My thoughts raced. Memory, I repeated. Not evidence. Not names. Memory. Damien remained silent. I could almost hear him thinking. Then understanding settled over me like the final note of a song. The lullaby, I whispered. The person who left these messages knew I would recognize it. This is not only about your mystery anymore. Someone deliberately included me. Damien spoke my name with unusual gentleness. Evelyn. Yes. Before tonight, Had you ever performed in this hotel? I shook my head. Never. Then whoever arranged this learned about you before we met. The realization sent a quiet chill across my shoulders. What had begun as an accidental collision now felt carefully connected by invisible threads stretching far beyond a single evening. Yet beneath the uncertainty, I noticed something unexpected. I was no longer afraid. Standing beside Damien, surrounded by old music and unanswered questions, I realized the unknown no longer sounded empty. It sounded like the beginning of a composition that neither of us had finished hearing. Damien closed the wooden box with remarkable care, as though even the silence inside it deserved respect. The metronome remained on the table between us, perfectly still now, yet I could almost imagine it beginning to swing again on its own. Follow the memory, I repeated softly. Someone keeps pointing us away from evidence and toward people. Damien considered that for several seconds before answering. You believe memories connect all of this. Music does not survive because people remember every note, I replied. It survives because people remember how it made them feel. My fingertips rested lightly against the edge of the piano once more. The polished wood felt reassuring, almost familiar now. Somewhere beyond the library walls, a grandfather clock chimed a single quarter hour. Time was moving faster than either of us realized. Before midnight, Damien murmured, "We still have less than an hour." I nodded slowly. Then whoever planned this expects us to understand something before the night ends. He picked up the metronome and examined it quietly. I heard the tiny latch open before he adjusted the pendulum. Instead of setting it into motion, he stopped. "There is an inscription carved underneath," he said. "Can you read it?" I asked. "It says, 'Every song begins with someone willing to listen.'" A smile appeared before I could stop it. That sounds exactly like my grandma. Then perhaps this connection is older than either of us understands. We left the hidden compartment exactly as we had found it and stepped back into the library. The room felt different now, less mysterious, more patient, almost as though it knew we had finally begun asking the correct questions. As we reached the doorway, the familiar ticking returned once again. Tick, tick, tick. This time it was steady, neither approaching nor retreating. I stopped immediately. "It is here." Damien looked around the room. "Where?" I tilted my head, listening to the tiny reflections bouncing from shelves, tables, and glass display cases. Then I slowly walked toward an antique display cabinet near the entrance. The ticking became clearer with every step until I reached the glass. Inside, Damien unlocked the cabinet with a small brass key hanging nearby. Resting on a velvet stand was an antique pocket watch, its silver surface polished until it reflected the room like still water. "It has been here all along," he said quietly. "Not exactly." I leaned closer, smiling faintly. "Listen." He became silent. After several seconds he understood. "It is too regular." "Yes." A real pocket watch changes slightly with movement. This sound is being played through something hidden. He searched carefully around the cabinet before discovering a tiny wireless speaker concealed beneath the velvet lining. He looked back at me with genuine admiration. Someone wanted us to chase a sound that never moved, which means the real person never needed to carry a watch at all. Damien nodded slowly. The ticking was a guide, and the lullaby was the message. We stood together without speaking. The puzzle had changed shape completely. Whoever created it had never intended to escape unnoticed. Instead, they had been carefully leading us from one memory to another, making certain we discovered each clue in the proper order. A soft knock interrupted the quiet. Lucas appeared in the doorway. "Sir," he said respectfully, "most of the guests have departed. However, the concierge asked me to deliver this. It arrived only a few minutes ago." An envelope changed hands. Thick paper. Fine stationery. Damien opened it carefully before unfolding a single card. "What does it say?" I asked. He drew a slow breath. "It says, 'The final answer is waiting where the first promise was made.'" My heartbeat quickened. Before either of us could speak again, another memory surfaced with perfect clarity. I remembered my grandmother's voice after every piano lesson. She always ended with the same sentence. "When you cannot find the truth, return to the place where the music first began." I slowly turned toward Damien. "I think I know where we have to go next." Damien and I left the music library without another word because some moments become smaller if you try to explain them too quickly. The hotel had grown almost silent now. The last conversations drifted toward the lobby as guests collected coats and thanked one another for a successful evening. Somewhere beyond the revolving doors, New York continued moving exactly as it always had, unaware that two strangers were following a trail built from memories instead of footprints. Where did the music first begin? Damien asked quietly as we entered the empty ballroom. I smiled to myself. Not for me. For us. He slowed beside me. Explain. I turned my face toward the grand piano that still rested beneath the warm stage lights. Everything changed the moment I finished playing. If someone planned every clue, they expected us to return here. We walked together until I reached the piano bench. My fingertips brushed the polished keys with familiar affection. The instrument greeted me like an old friend. I sat down without thinking and allowed my hands to rest above the keyboard. Play whatever you remember, Damien said. Not whatever I remember, I answered softly. Whatever my grandmother always played before she taught me something important. My fingers found the opening notes naturally. The simple melody floated through the empty ballroom, gentle enough to blend with the quiet hum of the chandeliers above us. Every note carried another childhood memory. Her patient voice, warm afternoons, the scent of cedar from her workshop, the reassuring certainty that listening carefully could change an ordinary day forever. When I reached the final measure, something unexpected answered from somewhere above the stage. A second piano note. Just one. Clear. Delicate. Not played by me. I lifted my hands immediately. Damien looked upward. A maintenance walkway overlooked the ballroom, hidden in the shadows near the lighting equipment. Soft footsteps crossed the narrow platform before stopping. Then an older voice echoed gently through the room. She still remembers. There was no fear in the voice, only relief. Damien remained calm. Who are you? The footsteps descended a nearby staircase at an unhurried pace. An elderly gentleman approached, his shoes tapping softly across the polished floor. He stopped several feet away. My name will not help you tonight, he said kindly. What matters is the promise I made many years ago. I listened closely. His breathing was steady. His movements were careful rather than secretive. He carried no tension in his voice. You knew my grandmother, I whispered. Very well. Emotion quietly entered his reply. She repaired every instrument in my conservatory for almost 20 years. She believed music should never belong only to those who could afford it. My throat tightened. Why did you bring me here? He smiled. I could hear it. Because she asked me to. If I ever met a young pianist named Evelyn Carter, I was to give her one final lesson. Damien stood beside me without interrupting. The gentleman continued. Years ago, she worried that the world would spend too much time teaching you what you could not see instead of celebrating what you could hear. She wanted someone outside your family to remind you that your greatest gift was never your hearing alone. It was your willingness to trust it. My eyes filled with quiet tears. Not from sadness. From recognition. Every clue. Every melody. Every carefully placed message had never been designed to expose an enemy. They had been arranged to fulfill a promise made between two old friends long before I ever stepped into the Blackwood Grand. The gentleman reached into his coat and handed Damien a small envelope. This belongs to her granddaughter. Damien placed it gently into my hands. Inside was a single handwritten page. Although I could not read it myself, I already knew whose handwriting rested beneath my fingertips. Would you read it? I asked. Damien unfolded the letter slowly before speaking in a voice softer than I had ever heard. My dearest Evelyn, if these words have reached you, then you listened exactly the way I always hoped you would. The world will often mistake strength for noise and certainty for sight. Do not believe it. The people who truly change lives are the ones who notice the quiet things everyone else ignores. Keep listening. Keep trusting. One day your gift will lead someone else home, just as it led you to yourself. With all my love, Grandma. Silence embraced the ballroom after the final sentence. It was not an empty silence anymore. It was full of gratitude, memory, and beginnings. I folded the letter carefully against my heart before turning toward Damien. I thought tonight was about finding answers. He smiled in a way that needed no explanation. Perhaps it was. I laughed softly through grateful tears. Then the greatest answer was never hidden in a watch, a note, or a melody. What was it? He asked. I rested one hand on the piano and the other over my grandmother's letter. that sometimes the person who helps us find our future is someone who believed in us long before we ever believed in ourselves.